Good morning. Welcome to episode 130, or 2.5 years worth of weekly updates on the news and stories impacting the drilling industry. That's right, construction, environmental, industrial, water, and geothermal. All brought to you by the team at The Driller. I'm your host, Brock Yorty. This week in the news, we'll start with the 2018 Farm Bill expiring. That's right, it's dead. Next, we're going to head over to California's Central Valley, where regulators are cracking down on groundwater sub-basin overpumping that will impact 1 million acres of farmland and 250,000 residents. For this week's feature, we're going to cover the UN's General Assembly at Climate Week, where all the world leaders came together to adopt a pact for the future. It's been several weeks since we've hit the news, so I'm really eager to jump in and talk about what's impacting our industry. But before we do that, I have a quick safety challenge. It's fall. November 3rd, it'll be daylight savings, and all of our good daylight that we've been used to for the past 6.5 plus months, the days are going to get shorter. Our operations are going to be impacted by this. I want you to challenge your teams right now to consider our commutes to projects, our hours of operations, working in low light conditions. These are all things that as we get on these job sites, we start thinking about it being fall, slippery, wet, low lights, slips, trips, and falls increase, along with all of those unknown hazards that come to not being able to see as well as we can on a job site or as we commute. I challenge you right now, leaders. How are we going to operate safely heading into fall? Let's jump into some news. The last few weeks has been coverage of the geothermal drillers tutorial in Boston, and man, has it been rewarding. But we've had a lot of news that's happened. So let's jump into it and start with the one that's right on the top of my mind. At midnight, October 1st, Congress failed to extend the 2018 Farm Bill. We saw this coming. We've been covering it. I truly believed we'd get it passed before we got into all of this uh, race to November 5th. But sadly, the plan was to replace this Farm Bill, not renew the 2018. And part of that comes from Farm Bureau's economists that report that the budget numbers created in 2018 in today's inflation dollars are 80% of what they were. I want you to consider that the 2018 Farm Bill was $900 billion. And now the new one that was proposed, which is dead, is 1.5 trillion. And now, with less than a month in November 5th, it's up to new Congress who will take over in January to sort out this problem. What does that mean? It doesn't mean everything halts immediately. We have plans. There are laws in place that jump back to the 1930s and 1940s farm laws. It's 2024, everybody. So first and foremost, not all programs will shut down immediately. If you remember last November, as we had issues and President Biden renewed the extension to the 2018 Farm Bill, we heard from the Western states who needed USDA funding in conjunction with the Department of Interior and Reclamation to continue water withdrawal impact studies. That was all funded by the Farm Bill. Luckily, local crop insurance, emergency food assistance programs are not impacted. So those impacted by Hurricane Helen and these other possible extreme weather that we could have pop up between now and January, our farmers are protected. However, the inability to pass the Farm Bill is directly related to the division amongst the funding that included climate smart agriculture, rural electric infrastructure, how to appropriate the funds for the Inflation Reduction Act for decarbonization and farming. And the big one, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's right, SNAP. It's a big deal. As we talk Justice 40 and everything else that's happening, the SNAP program is vital to our farm bills. If we dive deeper into this, farmers who can't count on the programs in place for the Farm Bill are not able to invest in the future. That includes new equipment, irrigation, maintaining existing infrastructure. I want you to consider the future and the impacts of not getting the Farm Bill passed. Next, let's jump into the news coming out of California Central Valley, specifically the largest agricultural producing valley, the San Joaquin, where California water regulators, specifically the State Water Resource Control Board, has voted unanimously to put Tool groundwater sub-basin on probationary status for overpumping. That may not seem like much of an enforcement for overpumping, but this overpumping caused damage to a canal that affects 1 million acres of farmland and more than 250,000 people. So what does probationary status mean? It brings additional state oversight and requirements for well owners to report how much they are pumping. 10 months ago on the newscast, we reported about the Department of Justice being involved in evaluating many of these California groundwater districts and how they are managed and the experts they're using. So I want you to consider, of those 250,000 people, there are 550 private water wells that are now at risk of becoming unproductive. California has cited that a review of the groundwater plants found lack of oversight and lowering of the groundwater levels, which impacted water quality and caused subsidence of the 152-mile canal, the Kern Canal. It also stated that the subsidence had impacted as much as 7 feet of subsiding. In 2014, California developed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This is the law that local agencies use for developing plans for curbing of overpumping with the goal of managing groundwater sustainability by 2040. They put this law in place in 2014. It's 10 years later. In 9 years, we saw 7 feet of subsidence. Of course, we've seen the biggest drought impacts, as we've talked about Hoover Dam and Lake Powell. This is further proof that what we're doing today impacts our future of being sustainable, which is going to lead us right into our feature this week, the UN's Pact for the Future. We can't save this planet in isolation. It takes every country and every individual understanding their impacts and what happens as we move into the future. Our feature this week is on the future. And that comes out of the news from 2024's Climate Week, where on September 22nd, the world leaders came together to adopt a pact for the future. This is exactly where we've been going from the past climate weeks and COP27 and COP28, that as citizens of Earth, we have to move towards the future. And as stated by the UN, this pact covers a broad range of topics, including peace and security, sustainable development, climate change, human rights, future generations, and how we handle data, AI, and digital cooperation throughout the world. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made this statement. The Pact for the Future Global Digital Compact and the Declaration of Future Generations opens the door to new opportunities and untapped possibilities. Our UN General Secretary is a phenomenal man. Before 2017, he was the UN High Commissioner for Refugees from 2005 to 2015. In that decade, he saw firsthand refugees becoming climate change refugees, which, as we can see today, is becoming ever more prevalent. So let's break down this pact. It starts with peace and security. Again, extreme weather and climate change is a major multiplier to countries' peace and security. The UN has comments that start with the Security Council reform, which plans to improve effectiveness and representation of countries in Africa. Next, complete nuclear disarmament, followed by prevention of space arms race, and then fair and equitable exploration of space, with measures to prevent weaponization of autonomous weapons. What does that mean? Skynet. That's what that means, everybody. We can't have Skynet. When you look at how we start with peace and security, climate change, that fight seems so much more attainable, especially as we compare it to eliminating nukes, creating the real life Star Trek, and ensuring everybody has phasers set to stun. Okay, let's get out of the insanity. Let's get to the big piece of this pact, which is sustainable development, which includes climate financing for development. The goal is to create financing that is better representing for developing countries. It starts by giving developing countries a greater say on how decisions are taken at the international financial institutions. It's mobilizing more financing from multilateral development banks to developing countries and helping them meet their needs, evaluating sovereign debt architecture so that these countries can borrow sustainably to invest in the future. This includes pulling in key players from the IMF, the UN, and G20. A major focus is in addressing the challenges of climate change by delivering more finance to help countries adapt to climate change and invest in renewable energy. Let's think about this. The developing countries that are being impacted the most do not have the best credit to be able to get out of the hole they're in that we, as the developed world, are impacting. This is a big deal of considering how we release these funds and how we build up the developed world collaborating with the undeveloped world. Within this section, the UN addresses the idea of ways to introduce global minimum level of taxation on high net worth individuals. I'm, yeah, that's a tough one. How about we think of it this way? Those with high net worth, why don't we enforce them to build their own personal ESG practices, environmental, social, and governance practices? Here's the secret, everybody. From the moment of the Industrial Revolution to today, the reason they're high net worth individuals is due to carbon production. There's no two ways around it. Okay, back to the UN Pact, which ironically, the final piece for sustainable development and climate financing is rooted in the confirmation of the need to keep global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius or above pre-industrial levels and to transition away from fossil fuels to achieve our net zero emission goals by 2050. I want you to put this into perspective. 25 years, 2 months, and 23 days from now is 2050. I'll be 70 years old. And our goals are based on what we can get done in the next 5 years, 2 months, and 23 days. That's right. Currently, the amount of carbon we are producing, what we do from now to 2030, will determine what percentage of polar ice caps we have left and what our world looks like. The Driller Newscap episode 123, we discussed the European Union's Copernicus climate change study that stated that we have breached the 1.5 degree threshold for at least 12 months. And that study came out in February of 2024. We all know that July 2024 was the second hottest July on record in the world, with 2023 being the hottest. I want you to consider that the 2015 Paris Agreement, which was the treaty amongst 195 nations to fight climate change, that's when we set that 1.5 degree threshold, because breaking 2 degrees Celsius will start a catastrophic failure of melting the Greenland and Antarctica ice sheets. And it'll be irreversible with at 2 degrees Celsius, 50% of the world's glaciers disappearing, increasing sea level rise by 3.5 inches. Furthermore, that 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit increase. All right, drillers, I figured if I went to 3.5 inches, it was time for me to say 1.5 degrees Celsius is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. So, if we break this, that 2.7 degree Fahrenheit domino falls over, it knocks over the extreme weather domino, which hits the energy production domino, which knocks over the domino that turns off the lights. No, it's not quite the end of the world, but I want you to think of it this way. Extreme heat and extreme cold require extreme amounts of energy. And that's why everything goes dark. In the United States, we've seen this happen twice in Texas in the last couple of years. And we see rolling brownouts across major metropolitan cities around the world. And that's just the domino that knocks over the energy sector, not the one that's knocking over the impact of the water domino, which hits the food scarcity domino. Just in the United States, consider us as a developed country and our farm bill and everything we're talking about right now in impacts from extreme weather and climate change. Now let's go to developing countries and day zero scenarios for water rationing and food security. So the world's 2030 goals are very important because it's our future. The Paris Agreement 9 years ago in 2015 had wide scale adoption for what we had to do. And I want you to think about we needed to transition away from fossil fuels. And that's what we asked over the Paris Agreement at COP28 last year in Saudi Arabia. And nearly 200 countries said yes, we're in, with the COP28 being so important. And we're just a few weeks away from COP29 to see how we're doing. So the next piece of the pact by the UN is recognizing the future. We've seen in this newscast already, from the 2018 Farm Bill to the water laws set in place by California in 2014, and how 10 years of drought has changed that. The future started yesterday. The UN has plans in its pact for the future by empowering the youth and future generations. The UN has the first ever declaration of future generations, which has concrete steps to take account of future generations in their station of making decisions and having an envoy for future generations be part of the UN. The UN has a commitment to more meaningful opportunities for young people to participate in the decisions that shape their lives, especially at the global level. This is what it means to be part of the United Nations as we roll into less than a month in election days here in the United States. This is what the UN's doing. Yes, it's a peacekeeping force. Yes, it's helping with MPOX and all of the things that are happening around the world, but it's about including everybody around the world. So beyond recognizing the importance of future generations, the pact has strong human rights and gender commitments, starting by strengthening their work on human rights, especially equality and the empowerment of women, which we see in the water world, that women and girls spend a majority of their day carrying water. And we need to get to a place where they can professionally grow and be the global citizens that they are. So it has a clear call on the need to protect human rights defenders. They will achieve this with engagement of all stakeholders in global governments, including local, regional, governmental, civil society, and private sectors. There's also a big piece in the pact that focuses on how do we get here and how do we recognize protecting people, protecting the future, protecting the planet. And that last piece is on digital cooperation, including AI governance and connecting all the people's schools and hospitals to the internet, anchoring a digital cooperation in human rights and international law, and making the online space safe for all. The UN, for this digital cooperation, has asked all countries to make laws concrete by 2030. This isn't something we thought of overnight. Uh, the General Secretary, Antonio, he had a beautiful discussion, a speech he did on World Environment Day back in June, 3.5 months before this discussion. And he made the following speech that's titled, "Our planet is trying to tell us something, but we don't seem to be listening." I've read this a couple times. I implore you to go to YouTube, go read this. It's a fantastic speech. And I'm going to hit on the parts that have struck my soul, my mind as I think about this. And like I say, I encourage you to go read it. He starts with, "Humanity is just one small blip on the radar. Like the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs, we're having an outside impact on the climate. However, we are not the dinosaurs. We're the meteor. We're not only in danger, we are the danger. We're also the solution. So, dear friends, we are at this moment of truth." He goes on to outline how quickly we are burning through our carbon budget. That budget's 200 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's the breaking point that's going to take us beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. And currently, everybody, we're producing 40 billion tons a year. So let's do the quick driller math on that. If we got 5 years and we're doing 40 billion, by 2030, we're there. Now, do you understand why it's so important? The next part that hit me, he says we need to fight harder. Now, the truth is, the battle for 1.5 degrees will be won or lost in the 20s. That's right, right now to 2030. And it's under the watch of all leaders today. And it all depends on the decisions those leaders take or fail to take, especially in the next 18 months. Election days, less than 30 days away. And I want you to think about the states with the most House seats in the country and what climate action we're taking as we see zombie orphan wells come back online and we see carbon production and we see that this is a hoax. The dollars that are being used to greenwash or make these big arguments or drillers, how we can be drilling for ground source geothermal loops, or we can even be going as complex as hot rock geothermal. Back to his speech from World Environment Day. He says it's crunch time and the decisions made at G7, G20, and what happens in the near future at COP29 requires maximum cooperation with maximum action. This speech is full of so many beautiful yet startling points, and he closes with this. Dear friends, we do not have a choice. Creating tipping points for climate progress or careening towards tipping points for climate disaster. We can solve climate crisis, but we can't solve it in isolation. This is an all-in moment. United Nations is all in, working to build trust, find solution, inspire cooperation our world so desperately needs. He continues with, to the young people, to civil society, to cities, regions, businesses, and others who live in the leading edge towards a safer, cleaner world. I say thank you. You're on the right side of history. You speak for the majority. Keep it up. Don't lose courage. Don't lose hope. It is we the people. Of course, it's the polluters and the profiteers. However, together we can win. But it's time for the leaders to decide whose side they're on. Tomorrow it'll be too late. Now is the time to mobilize. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to deliver. This is our moment of truth. The UN General Secretary said, we the people of the world. We're at a big piece. And you can go and you can read Newsweek and New York Times and Variety and all of the awesome things that happened at Climate Week 2 weeks ago. And this was just a blurb because it's the UN and we have a lot going on and it gets washed away. And we think they're going to be talking about Ukraine and Russia or Israel and Gaza. And those things are just as important. But I want you to think about right now, as we are here, and we are also global citizens. And climate change impacts water. It impacts our drilling. And we, as he stated about the meteor, we are the meteor. Drillers, we are Harry Stamper that lands on that meteor, drills into the middle of it, sets that loop, blows that bastard up. That's what we can do right now. Thank you for joining us for episode 130 of the Driller Newscast. How the heck did we get to 130? There's been a lot going on. There's been a lot to support. I appreciate every bit of feedback and collaboration and camaraderie that have come from this, and we're going to continue for another 130 episodes. Who knows where we'll be in another 2.5 years? We better be installing as many ground source geothermal loops as possible. We better be conserving our water. We better be considering how we can be better global citizens. And it's not about they're going to take our barbecue grills. It's not. It's about not breaking that 200 billion tons of carbon, that tipping point. Because we'll have plenty of new fresh water going into the oceans and raising it when that happens. Thanks, Driller team. I can't do any of this without you. It's been an awesome ride. Appreciate all the sponsors. So in the end, this is just the beginning. Let's get empowered and do what's right. Check out thedriller.com for all the greatest content. Thanks, everybody.